Welcome to the Real Life Buyer podcast. In this podcast, you will hear interviews with business owners, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, authors, and technical specialists in their field. These professionals will hasten your development, accelerate your career, and broaden your business know-how. Now, introducing your host, Dave Barr, interviewing with a purchasing twist.
Hello and welcome to the Real Life Buyer. Are you seeking the wisdom to help you develop the knowledge, skills and confidence to build winning teams and cultures that thrive? My latest guest, Jason Skeesick, is an entrepreneur, coach and the host of the weekly Spear and Clover podcast. Jason helps entrepreneurs design and install proven frameworks in their business so they may discover the time to start focusing on making an impact. His background includes having a degree in finance and has worked as a commercial banker. He is a US Army veteran and has owned a large CrossFit gym in Chicago for the past 12 years. Today, we're going to discuss the practices that the highest performers in coaching and leadership use to achieve peak performance and success in their clients and teams. So, without further ado, I welcome Jason onto the podcast. Hi, Jason.
Oh, Dave, thank you so much. You honor me. I appreciate that introduction, and I'm just so excited to talk to you today.
Excellent. Yes, I've been looking forward to this. It's a huge honor for me to have another podcaster on as well, especially with your pedigree. So hopefully we'll have some good fun today. So I mentioned just now that you're the founder and owner and head coach of Chicago Elite Fitness and Bucktown CrossFit. I hope I've got that right. And have gone on to coach and consult with hundreds of entrepreneurs over the past 4 years. So can you tell us some of the whys, the highs and the lows of this journey before we dive deeper into what else you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for starters, why I do what I do really boils down to the spear and clover symbol. So if you are looking at this spear and clover, you see it. But if you can just hear me, there's a Spartan spear. I have it tattooed on my forearm as well as on some hats and shirts, and it's the name of the podcast. And then there's an infinite loop of rope on the outside of that. And those represent two of my core values. The first is what I was born with, and that's called spirit of the puppy. And very much, high energy. Some people call it ADD, high energy, super passionate about the things that I'm passionate about. I love trying new things. I love meeting new people. I'm full of adventure and play. And the second is military mindset. And that's what keeps me disciplined and hardworking. Well, I've spent periods of my time, this is kind of coming full circle here. I've spent periods of my life pursuing the spirit of the puppy, where I started a CrossFit gym, but I didn't really take it seriously. Or I worked at a snowboarding hill so I could snowboard whenever I wanted, and worked at the mall so I could have nice clothes with a discount. And I've spent time of my career where I was focused on military mindset. I was literally a soldier in the United States Army for 4 years, and I pursued a finance degree and became a banker in one of the biggest banks in the world for a number of years as well. But it wasn't until I combined those two things together that ultimately I found success. And first, that was the form of really focusing 100% of my time and energy on building a business out of Chicago Elite Fitness, which is still running to this day, although it's managed and run and owned primarily by my brother, Andrew Westcott. He does a great job. And so go ahead. That sort of brings us to where we're at now.
No, please carry on. It's interesting.
Yeah. And so what I found was, number one, if I'm just military mindset or if I'm just spirit of the puppy, I either don't enjoy my life or I don't have any real things to show for it in the form of money or growing or, the feeling of helping change people's lives. Right. And so I really focused on that. And then the second thing was, for a period of time, I thought that I was a fitness entrepreneur. I was somebody who really wanted to help people change their lives in the form of changing their fitness. And what I've found is ultimately, it's not just fitness that I like to help people with. I like to help people transform on whatever journey they're going through. And so I built Tribe around our CrossFit gym, which I very much loved and cherished, and actually spent a great deal of time with some of those folks this last weekend, which was wonderful. But now I've found that I can take even other people on an even richer journey by helping them up their mountain that they want to climb. And so the folks that I've chosen to do that with are entrepreneurs. So now I help entrepreneurs who have a mountain that they want to climb, and I just help them to make sure that they're prepared to do that and that they understand the journey that they're embarking on.
That's quite fascinating, and it's quite a diverse background you have there, mixing banking with the military, obviously for fitness. I'm interested by your comment, military mindset. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah, so military mindset is my second core value. It's something that I learned by being in the Army and understanding what that meant. And so what that is discipline. It's hard work. It's stepping forward when there's an opportunity to take responsibility. I think at our best, entrepreneurs are the people who raise their hand and take responsibility when there's an opportunity to do that. But at our worst, entrepreneurs love building things so much that often you see a pile of half completed projects behind an entrepreneur. And so what I've found is the spirit of the puppy is great at coming up with ideas and starting something and starting to build it. It's the military mindset that's required to make sure that 10 years later, you've grown and you're still paying your bills and you have something to show for it and your customers still love you. I think there's two types of entrepreneurs, Dave. I think there's entrepreneurs where they're really great at selling you something and you really get excited about it, but then ultimately you don't have great things to say about them. And then there's entrepreneurs or in people really, where the longer you know them, the more you like them, the more you understand that they really are who they say they are. And I try to only work with those folks as well.
Yeah, that's great for you to explain what you mean by that. And clearly you can understand that it's important for people in the military to make decisions. You say take responsibility. Absolutely, they've got to be disciplined without a doubt. But I also think of structure, procedure, process as being quite critical. And when I was researching your background and looking at the things you do, certain words come out. You work with entrepreneurs to build their organization around clear and unique foundations, which I think is critical for, you think of the military mind, and frameworks. Can you share with us what you see as being those foundations and frameworks that are critical, and how do you get to those points? What are the steps you need to do to achieve structured foundations and frameworks?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a course that we run entrepreneurs through, and it starts with foundations. And I became obsessed with this idea of a dynasty organization. And so, in America, we have the New England Patriots or the Dallas Cowboys or the Chicago Bulls or the LA Lakers. In New Zealand, they have the All Blacks. In, England, they have Manchester, right? Like Manchester United. And these are storied organizations that we think of as dynasties. And what do we mean by that? Well, they're always in a position to win. It seems like it doesn't matter who's on the field. It seems like it doesn't matter what the conditions are. They are more likely to win than others. And I think it's not because of the players, and it's not because of the coaches, and it's not even because of the plays. It's because of the foundations that the business is built on. Those are very, very strong. And so you can think of examples of these organizations where they'll take somebody that maybe wouldn't have been successful somewhere else, and all of a sudden that person becomes a rock star. The All Blacks, for instance, everybody sweeps the shed, right? And so because of that, the first portion of that course is just talking about what are your core values? What are the goals that are important to you? How do we define them very, very clearly? And then we talk about frameworks. So the folks that I work with, a lot of times I describe them as magicians. These are people that have the magic between their ears. They know how to do what they do great. They've run through the brick walls. They've worn all the different hats, but maybe they get to this point where they're stuck because they can't get to the next level if they're the only ones that can do what they do. And so by frameworks, what I mean is you need to have structures where you take that magic and you codify it out of your brain into science, because that's what it is. And so this is roles and responsibilities that are clear, that have training, that have no uncertainty as to exactly what needs to be done in any given time. They have context, which means they see how their actions today will ultimately build them towards their goals as well as the company's goals. And it also it's an ability for you to give them systems and operating procedures, SOPs, or standard operating procedures, where they know just on no uncertain terms what you do. Because ultimately magic, we think of this thing as, oh, I have the magic between my ears. Really, it's just the way you make decisions. It's the actions you take. And you can, if you take the time to ask yourself those questions, which is what I do, you can codify that into something repeatable and scalable, because it's very, very difficult. Unless you're Joe Rogan and you can just sit behind a microphone and reach 100 million people, you really do need a team that is able to energize your vision and not just guess. They need to have that science.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Some of the things you mentioned there. Now, I think of some large organizations, and we can all think of some big names that have had the foundations, structure, the systems and procedures in place, but have at a point in time failed. Now, what do you think has fundamentally gone wrong in those what were very sound and sometimes huge corporations that have resulted in their ultimate failure? What do you think has caused that? Is it just circumstance, bad management? Is it leadership? What's your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. And one that I probably will not satisfactorily answer, but I can start with this. I think every virtuous desire probably has a dark cousin, right? And so if your business is set, like, don't be evil. Google famously was don't be evil. And I should say you shouldn't use somebody else's core values or mission. You should create your own unique stuff because it will matter. You're not going to be as good at being me or being Google or being Steve Jobs as me or Google or Steve Jobs, right? Sergey Brin, by the way. I do know his name. So what goes wrong is probably you set off to do a thing. And at a certain point, that thing becomes more complicated. And so because of that, the nuance to which you are able to control it starts to decrease. And so, I think I've heard it described as, as you grow, a CEO has to make more increasingly difficult decisions with increasingly less information. And so at a certain point, there are breakdowns. I also think human incentives are a fickle thing to deal with. It's very difficult to align human incentive with business incentive. And so this is why we see KPIs and bonuses and maturity dates on stock options and stuff. But in finance school, they show you here's a well-meaning, CEO with a well-meaning company, and here's how his actions were influenced by his incentives, and they were contrary to the incentives of the organization. So just to paint that picture, just to eliminate that picture, there are times when, let's say, for instance, a CEO is compensated by his bonus is based on the stock price. Well, what if he figures out that there's a short-term way to raise the stock price at the end of the year, which may have a long-term downfall for the company? So there's very complicated, intertwined incentives and relationships when businesses inevitably grow. And then I would also say too that oftentimes people are not as thoughtful about why they enter into relationships or the actions they take. And so maybe they get down the path a little ways and they realize that it wasn't what they thought it was going to be, or the promises that they feel were made to them were not lived up to. And so there's any number of reasons why. I mean, how many people are listening to this right now and they're in a job or a working environment, whether or not they own the business, and it's not what they thought it was. And if they could blink and snap their fingers, they would be doing something else. Well, this is all over the world.
Yeah. So there are some very big organizations, and you mentioned some there that clearly are still very successful, but you see some that almost seem to outgrow themselves. And something kind of happens. Is it the fact that the leadership is too far away from the people at the bottom? It's too much of a hierarchical structure, and perhaps it needs to be flattened out. Is it because the business gets too complex and so it should be broken into smaller businesses? So I'm quite fascinated to understand, what are the triggers that suddenly a business now needs to, break itself down into smaller entities so they stay agile, able to respond to the market quickly, rather than a behemoth that really does struggle to adapt and move and pivot in a way that certainly today we see businesses. And I think of the things going on in our financial world that is changing so quickly. 1 minute we're all doing very well, the next minute inflation is rife. If you can't act and change and pivot, then you fail sometimes.
Yeah, and I would just add to that too. You mentioned something earlier, so I feel like this is worth opening up a little bit, and that is sort of how do organizations? Is there a size thing? There's a man named Dunbar that was I forget what he was, but he was scientifically studying primates and their congregation size, right? How big their tribes were. And I'll save you the boring story that I would just mix up. But it turns out that humans, as primates, human beings are basically capable of having relationships in groups of about 150 people. And so that means I can know you, I can know her, I can know him, and I can understand sort of the complex web of that. And so as a CrossFit gym owner, I'm very, very well aware of this. It took me 7 years to break 200 members, but it took me 6 months to break 300 members. And it's because with just me being the arbiter of all of those relationships, we would float between 120 and 160 every single month. And it would go up and it would go down and it would go sideways. One person would leave, two people would join, two people would leave, one person would join. That's how many I could do with a couple of role players. The moment that we structured that system by taking that magic from between my ears and training it to, 12, 15 coaches that we had at the time and a few full-timers, all of a sudden we exploded. And it was, I could stand here with a puffed up chest and say it was me, but actually the thing that it was not me. You see what I mean? And
Yep.
so when you talk about these organizations, you do see where organizations at about 150 can be very intimately run and very tightly controlled. And so in order to scale past that, you're faced with this choice of how heavily handed do we do this system, or do we just allow it to be 150 person tribal fiefdoms? I'm certain that we could find examples of each of those. The other thing I would add is commerce comes from the excess that's left over when we organize and create products or services, right? There's excess. And so when you see a huge organization, a huge multinational organization that has high rises that are half empty right now because everybody's staying at home, it's just a physical representation of how much excess you can get from scalable systems like coding, like having software, or like having SOPs for McDonald's, or like having training and things like that. And so there's actually so much excess that they can do a pretty marginal job, even maybe a bad job, and still have enough money to remain a going concern and even maybe grow.
Yeah. It's interesting you're talking about obviously your gym. You basically are almost trying to find the right people, the right mindset, where you can inspire them. You can give them the energy, the creativity, perhaps the culture they need to represent what you're about, and then pass that on to people coming into the gym, I guess. Now, that must be quite a skill in doing that. You've got to be able to choose the right people, educate them in the right way, make sure they represent your values, your beliefs, your culture. How do you go about achieving this as a coach with other business leaders? What skills do they need to master and then share to achieve this kind of success?
Yeah, so the short answer there is plus equals minus. And that is plus, everybody should have a mentor, somebody who is embodying the lifestyle that you seek to achieve. That person can be a friend, that person can be a parent or a loved one. It can be a paid relationship if that's necessary. So plus is having mentorship, somebody to guide the virtuous example, the Vitruvian man, right? The second is equals, people that you can look around that kind of keep you, that are at the same level as you, but kind of keep you honest, right? That guy does it this way, this girl does it that way. Okay, I can see sort of where I fit in. We help each other when we can. And then minus, we should all be mentoring somebody below us, because knowledge is what you get when you see something from one angle. I can do this thing. Wisdom is something I get by looking at the same thing from many different angles. And we get that by teaching others, because we have to actually come at it from so many different angles in order to be able to explain those things to those people. And so the short answer is that. The longer answer is a parable, right? This actually happened. I have a core value fit named James. James was a client very, very early on, maybe 10 years ago at my gym. And every time I would say something, it would be like he would just get it. He would know how to do it. It was never a struggle. He loved it. He would show up. If I ever had extra office hours or time to work with people on individual skills, that guy was there. And then one day, this is the natural progression, CrossFit had changed his life. Fitness and this virtuous thing had changed his life. And I asked him if he wanted to be a coach. And sure enough, he did. And it was like the first day, normally this takes months, the first day that he was on the field, on the floor coaching a class,
Yeah.
it was like my words were coming out of his mouth. I spent less effort training James than any other employee that I ever had. I can think of a few others, by the way, that did very, very well. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
And now I sold my my controlling interest in that business in 2020. And that guy still shows up at 5 a.m. a couple of times a week to coach a couple of classes. And his words are even better now than mine would have been when we first met. But I say that to say this. He came to me about 5 years ago and he was like, "Hey man, I'm really not feeling it lately. I don't feel right. Something's wrong." And I was like, "What's going on, man? I could tell something was a little off. What's going on?" And he's like, "Well, listen, I remember when you brought me on, I loved you and it was great. You coached all these classes and I got to see you all the time. And there were other people that I looked up to and they showed me how to be. And those people have moved on and the business has grown. So now you have to be the CEO instead of the coach. And so I don't get the thing that I used to get." And I go, "James, this is the next step. Now it's your job. I was the senior and you were the freshman, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now you're the senior. You have to be guiding them. This is the next step in your journey." And that was 5 years ago. And he still is coaching and leading that journey. And when I think of the cultural leaders in my organization now, he's one of them instead of one of the cultural followers. And then the equal sign, now he's the plus sign, right? And so that's the answer, I guess, in a long-winded way.
Yeah. Do you see, obviously, quite a critical thought here is that he suddenly has gone from a point of perhaps not believing in himself, admiring what you were doing, looking up to you clearly as a great mentor. Suddenly you managed to make him believe in himself where he didn't before. Do you kind of get when that change occurred? Is there something you particularly said that suddenly made him think, hey, I can do this, I can believe in myself, I can go out there and represent the person that I admire?
I don't know. I think action precedes emotion. I think action precedes the evidence of it where you believe it. And so because of that, like I just got a text yesterday from somebody, and it's somebody that I've been working with more recently. And he was like, hey, I just wanted to let you know how much I appreciate all the help you've given me. And you've totally changed the way I look at the world. And I see so many possibilities now. And this isn't to toot my own horn, but anytime I get a compliment like that, the first thing I say, first of all, thank you for your kind words. But second of all, one day soon, someone's going to send you a text message like this, because I plant the seed of understanding of like, hey, look, we're all on the same path if we're doing it right. If you're out here trying and you have goals and you're working to be better every day, we're all on the same path. And I can speak to that deeply if you want, but we're all on the same path of life. At one point, I was leading you on the path. And now you're leading somebody else on the path. And this path will exist long after you're gone. And it existed long before you got here. And so that understanding, there is kind of a continuum. So it'd be hard for me to tell you exactly when that happened. But the only thing I would tell you is like, when we're doing it right, we have those three relationships in place in sort of anything we're doing as human beings.
Yes, I guess there's perhaps using a sporting analogy, is that at some point you need to pass the baton. You can't keep running it with yourself. You need somebody else to support and back you up as well. And then you can carry on leading. Obviously, as a keen sportsman and coach yourself, what do you think are the key lessons, the habits, the behaviors that can be taken from the world of sport into the world of commerce?
Champions behave like champions all the time. And what I mean by that is there are many people that have unbelievable skill. We can think, whoever that is for you, you can think of them. But there's many people that you also know, maybe from high school or maybe from growing up, or maybe it's you, but that has unbelievable skill and is never a champion, right? It's very rare that a lazy person becomes a champion. Even if you think about somebody like a Conor McGregor, who maybe is giving off this bad image now, that guy was in the trenches for a long time. You know what I mean? So I can think of a couple examples, but to get where they got, they had to be disciplined. So you look at somebody like a Kobe Bryant, or, you know, he's the one I'll use as the example, where this guy's already a multiple time MVP. He's already won the championships. Everybody already knows he's in the top 3 greatest of all time. And he stays after the game to take 1,000 free throws because he makes it so he could never miss. Another great example is pool. If you watch a professional pool player, which I played pool competitively for a long time when I was a younger man, and if you watch pool players that are good, they can make 80% of the shots. But when you watch players that are great, they cannot miss. It's like not a part of, it's very hard to make them miss a shot that's makeable, right? And it's because they drill it and they drill it and they drill it again. And so that would be the number one, is that champions really behave like champions. They also surround themselves with other winners. They surround themselves with people who take the action. They understand that it's their actions that are going to lead to the result that they want. It's not just wanting the result. You know, if I ask you what your goal is and you say your goal is to make $1 million, well, maybe it is, but I'm a little skeptical right away, because that sounds like a round number that you haven't thought through. And so if I say, what's your goal? And you say $1 million, well, now I want to know how. Do you sell $1 million product? Do you have a job that pays you $1 million a year? What is that job? Do you sell $100,000 products a year? But I need to understand that there's scaffolding between this magical floating ethereal idea and like the science that it's going to take to actually get there.
Really interesting. Thinking about companies now, and every company, or great company, should I say, needs great leaders. You know, you put a bad leader in a great company, you will end up with a bad company, I think. What do you see are the kind of fundamental requirements of a great leader in the ability to consistently empower people and motivate people, especially when you've got a large corporation and there may be thousands of people in that business, but they can still somehow use their energy, their gravitas, you know, this special thing to motivate multiple people at multiple levels. What do you think that is? What do you think the secret sauce is?
It's a great question. So if you think about who are the people we value as the greatest leaders in the world, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me is generals. And if you think about a general, they have to be very talented at three separate, unique skills. One is they need to be able to rally troops to go into battle. They need to be able to get people excited and unified on one mission. They need to get them to be so excited to go take this hill or whatever it is that they're prepared to go fight to the death for it and not turn around and run away in fear, which is what we would all do if we were given a choice. So number one, they need to be able to inspire people towards change. We can break these down even further if you want. But number two is once the battle is happening, they need to be able to manage all of the things going on. They need to understand how to communicate with everybody in their unique roles, how to keep the flanking party from shooting at the other side, and all of these just complex things. They need to make sure that the bow and arrow people aren't hitting their own people. They need to be able to coordinate all of the actual actions on the field. And then the third skill they need is once that one job is over, they need to be able to get everybody back together. They need to be able to get them to go through their wounds and recover and get ready to be inspired to go take on the next battle. These are three incredibly difficult things that generals have to be able to do. And each one requires a totally different skill set. One is to inspire someone to go lead. Some of us are born with that. That's something that I can do. I can get you excited about something you want to go do. If you want to lose weight, if you want to learn how to grow a business, if you want to learn how to fucking do CrossFit or jiu-jitsu, I can get you excited about it. The second is very, very difficult. And it's not the same person that can manage the people on the field the same way as the same person that gets them all excited. It's much more analytical. It's much more task driven. It takes discipline and preparation to be ready to make the right decisions in the right time and be able to actually execute them with precision. This is why the military is so famous for SOPs, and really we even say SOPs because of the military, right? And then the final one is much more empathetic. This is, we've just gone through a difficult task. We've completed this project. We've sold that client. We've executed on this mission. We've recorded that podcast, whatever it is. And now I want you guys to take a breath. I want you to look over your shoulder and celebrate what we've did. But there's more work to do. And so now we need to get back together and we need to go. So in the one hand, you need charisma. You need to be able to get people excited. I'm kind of thinking this through as I'm saying it. You need to have charisma to get people excited, and you need to have focus, and you need to understand who you're talking to, because the things that inspire that group might not inspire a different group. The second hand is you need to have been prepared. You need to understand analytically and from a very real, meaningful, scientific way how to execute and manage that team on the field. And then the third is much more emotional. It's much more about understanding the mindset, the experience that you just put these men and women through, and being able to not just relate to what they're going through, but also gather them back together to a place where they're ready to now go and take on the next task.
Brilliant. I love that. And I like the general analogy. When you mentioned that, I immediately thought I've read a number of books on Napoleon Bonaparte, somebody who was physically not much of a, should we say, a presence, but you mentioned the word charisma. He could motivate huge numbers of people to go into battle and had incredible success. Okay, it didn't last forever, but it's phenomenal how he managed to galvanize people in the way that he did. And there's something in charisma. I could do with a few injections of that myself. But somehow some of these people, no matter what their stature, they can still somehow inspire people. So I find that kind of fascinating, and that's why I read it.
Yeah, I think we can think of very many positive examples, and we can think of very many negative examples. Charisma is not an equally distributed gift amongst God's people, right? There are just people out there that can sell ice to an Eskimo, and actually, I think to that point, I think charismatic people kind of break down on a continuum of you have very charismatic people who don't have to face their own flaws. And you see the Donald Trumps and maybe the Hitlers and whatever of the world, where it's like super charismatic and I can just wield this power. And then you have what I think to be a far more difficult thing, which is where you're charismatic and you actually do care about what that means, and you wield it in an ethical way, and you understand your own fallibility and flaws. If you can get to that place and still stand up in front of people and say, this is the way, you're onto something there, right? I mean, I have chills right now from that. Like the idea of not just being a charismatic figure that people will gather around, but also having the goods, having the knowledge and the understanding, and maybe the humbleness to understand that you're just a human being and that it's going to be hard, and lead with with that kind of stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that occurs to me, and I'd like to hear your take on this, you think of football managers, there are some incredible, you mentioned Manchester United, I think, earlier on. There's some incredible football managers out there that seem to turn a team around and make them absolutely unstoppable. And after a number of years, sometimes for whatever reason, those teams, the manager, lose the success. Can you think of, what is it when somebody's been so successful with a team for so long, suddenly lose that edge, and then for whatever reason they're sacked, they move on and they become a manager of another team? What is it that changes when they, achieve so much and suddenly it fails?
Well, if you're listening to this podcast today, you are hearing the best version of Jason Skeesick. If you came and lived at my house for a month, I might not seem so sexy. I might not seem so good. And so what I would say is, what is a coach? A coach, like all human beings, is just a series of systems. We are just the behaviors, the opinions, the way we solve problems, the way we ask questions, the way we think things through. That's what we are. And then the way we present them to others to guide them. And so a coach at his best, or hers, is someone whose system works well to gather people together to get them out on the field and da-da-da-da-da-da. Over a long enough timeline, we can only come up with so many brilliant things to say in so many doses, but everybody is human, which means that over a long enough timeline, you will start to see the cracks in that facade. And if they start to personally feel their own fall from grace, maybe they're not able, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is why it's difficult for Mike Tyson to get knocked out and then come back as ferocious the next time. This is why it's difficult for a champion to sleep on silk sheets, is a famous quote. It's like, it's difficult to have a lot of money and still feel like the underdog who's fighting the world, right? And so what I would say is the only way that seems to be able to combat this seems to be two. Is one, you find yourself on this side of that paradigm that I was talking about before, and you're Anthony Robbins. He really seems to be who we hope he is. Or Joe Rogan, he really seems to be who he says he is. Or you shut up, or you stop talking. This is what Osho did. If you're the guru, you start by talking a lot, and you have all these great ideas and people start to follow you, and then you shut the F up, because if you talk too much, you're going to start to say things people disagree with.
Yeah.
And so I think the most successful people either just genuinely become that human being that is, enlightened, or whatever you want to call it. I think Tony Robbins is an excellent example of that. Or even you could say like a Bill Belichick, or, some of these great leaders, maybe presidents, right? But more often is what happens is you see them start to shut up to continue that success, because it's like, well, here's that book I wrote. That was good. Remember that? But if I keep talking, you're going to know that I'm full of shit. Sorry for cursing, by the way. I don't know if you curse on your show.
Okay. Now, obviously, there's been quite a lot of change in the last couple of years. We've seen tremendous negative things happen, shall we say. And amongst that, there have been some people who have decided to leave business, obviously retire. Others that have been forced out of their jobs by, obviously, some of their leaders. And some of those people have decided to go it alone. Now, for somebody who's not been in a business before, who's not owned a business before, and they need to establish some effective systems and foundations and processes, to enable them to hopefully build a successful business. What would you recommend that they should focus on in the first year or two to become established and successful?
Yeah, I would say before if you've already lost a job or something like that, and you have to build a business, it's very difficult for me to recommend that somebody builds a business that doesn't have to. I have to. There's just no question that I'm going to build a business. It's just a matter of what I choose. And that's a delicate process that I've gotten better at over the years. And so what I would say is if you're listening to this and you enjoy the comfort of your job, or a different job that maybe you need to go find, it will certainly be a path of less resistance than starting a business. The people that should start a business are the people that are so compelled to do it, it's like it's all they think about. And there's a mission that must be accomplished. And so because of that, they must figure out what they need to take action to achieve that mission. If that's you, listen close, right? And so what I would say is, any business is going to ask you a series of questions. Whether you choose to know what they are or whether you choose to answer them does not matter. That business is going to ask you a series of questions. So you need to start by answering the most important questions, and then you work your way down into increasingly lower and lower questions, and your success will be dictated by the quality of the answers and by how nuanced and granular you're able to address the questions, right? So with that all said, the first things I would do is this is what I take people through. I would start with foundations. I would start with understanding your personal core values, not who you wish you were, but who you are, and potentially your core tenets, depending on the type of business. That means how at your best do you wish to perform your tasks and duties as a business? Are you lightning fast delivery? Are you the best quality, but maybe it takes a while? Are you the lowest price? Are you, the customer is always right? Or are you tribe before client? I don't know. That's you to decide. Second, I would come up with your actual goal. What is the one mountaintop that you want to be standing on in 10 years? Not what are the 3 that look appealing, because I see a lot of entrepreneurs that will take one step towards Mount Kilimanjaro, and then they'll take one step towards K2, and then they'll take one step towards, it's escaping me, another mountain.
Everest.
Everest. Yeah, sure. I started with Kilimanjaro. Anyway. And if you do that, you end up standing in the same spot, or certainly not on top of any mountains. And so you need to decide what is the one mountain you want to climb, and then what is the breakdown of that into smaller goals. And then lastly, I would create the systems that will be your business, because it's just incredibly unlikely that you're going to interview somebody and they're just going to magically be that one rock star who already understands what you want them to do and is an expert at it. This just doesn't happen. And when it does, you just need to recognize it's very dangerous, because it makes you feel like it's going to happen all the time. If the first 3 people I hired were James, really, I would be screwed, because I would just think I'm looking for James. And the truth is there's not that many of them out there. And of them, most of them own businesses. So it's like, it's very, very difficult to do. And so you can either draft or you can trade. You can either draft new talent that is the right core value fit and then train them up, or you can trade for experienced people who are already experts and hope and to indoctrinate them into your core values and tenets.
Great. Thanks for that. Now, just keeping an eye on the time. Can you tell people a little bit about your podcast and perhaps some of the places that people can go to discover more about what you teach?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dave. So my podcast is the Spear and Clover podcast. If you're enjoying this conversation, it's very much like that. I interview entrepreneurs who embody what I would call like a Spear and Clover lifestyle, which means that we're hard charging towards very big goals, but that we're taking time to enjoy ourselves. We're pursuing our passions. We're playing. We're enjoying our social life and taking time for ourselves. And I interview those folks once a week. You can find that on YouTube, as well as any of the social media platforms. Any of the audio podcasting platforms. We also have a mastermind called the Spear and Clover Mastermind. We meet every Friday, and it is a digital city that we're growing, full of problem-solving, visionary entrepreneurs. And we come together to hear an expert guest speaker, be able to ask them questions. I'm bringing in unbelievable other entrepreneurs to talk to the group. And then we spend 1 hour in small groups of 4 helping mastermind through each other's problems. So we have the plus and the equals, and then we leave it to you to be helping others to find your minus. And then, of course, we do have a course called Dynasty Defined. And essentially, Dynasty Defined is helping you. I sell questions, not answers. So I'm asking you the questions to go out and generate your own operating system by the end of that course.
Okay, right. So you've obviously got your own website as well, I believe. You're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and I'll put all those links into the show notes for people to jump on, as well as obviously you've got your great podcast. So just to finish on, you've clearly have helped many people over the years, and I'm quite keen to understand what you would say is some of the biggest transformations that you've facilitated over that time period. So if you could just look back in your vault of memories and say, okay, other than Jason, I've really helped a couple of people. They've achieved X, Y, and Z. They've gone from this to that. Which ones would you pull out and share as a great examples of how they get to where they want to be through your support?
Yeah. So it's funny because the things that I overtly do, whether it's fitness or like business health, right? Those things, I have some great stories. People that have lost 100 pounds, people that have gone from unable to walk up the stairs without holding onto the rail to being able to squat a couple 100 pounds on their back. But really the thing that I look back during building my fitness community and my tribe was the babies that are walking around because their parents met in our community and fell in love. Or this morning when I saw somebody post about how they were spending time with their best friends, and everyone in that picture, they met at my gym. right? And then when I cut forward to the entrepreneurs that I've worked with, I do have many stories of entrepreneurs that have gone from 6 to 7 figures or have gone from in debt to out of debt with freedom. But it's the businesses that exist. It's the business babies we've created, and it's the relationships that we've created. And it's the fact that I see somebody who was once a minus, who's now a plus, right? Who once was a mentee, who just was thirsty for knowledge and didn't have any of the answers. They had all the questions in the world and these big ideas, but no answers. And then I see those people now that are building tribes below them, and they're helping others down the path. To me, I think everybody is an archetypal like village job, and I am very much the shepherd of that role. I'm definitely not the fisherman. I'm not the best salesman in the world. I'm definitely not the carpenter. I'm not the one that's going to build a giant company that's intricate with many, many moving parts, but I can definitely help to make sure that those sheep get where they need to go without losing as many as possible.
Brilliant. It's a great way to end the show. It's been really interesting talking to you today, Jason. Thanks very much for sharing lots of inspirational thoughts and some great ideas. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Dave. I appreciate you having me on, and I just appreciate anybody that's still listening.
Great. Thank you, mate. Take care. So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it and it's given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. If you are a purchasing or a supply chain professional, business owner or director, come and join my Facebook group, the Purchasing and Supply Chain Community Hub, a safe place to engage with like-minded, friendly people. See you soon. Bye.